The portion for today's meditation is taken from 1 Corinthians chapter 4 verses 1 to 10. This letter was written by Paul to the young church at Corinth as it was facing some serious problems including divisions, lawsuits, sexual immorality, and even misuse of spiritual gifts. Corinth was in many ways the chief city of Greece and very rich and influential. However, the church at Corinth, even with all its richness and prominence, was plagued with so many problems which needed immediate intervention for the church to survive and later flourish. If we look closely, the problems faced by the Corinthian church are also faced by the churches today. And therefore, instructions of Paul are very much relevant for all of us in this present day. The portion we have taken for today's meditation focuses on the problem of divisions in the church. Chapter 1, verses 11 and 12 informs that the Corinthian church was divided into at least 4 divisions. In the portion for today's meditation, Paul outlines how the church must carefully move away from divisions to obedience of Christ alone. The instructions of Paul is at least twofold. First one, commitment from others and self to Christ. The Corinthian church members identified themselves as belonging to the groups of Paul, Apollos, Cephas, and even Christ. As expected, in such situations, they praised the virtues of their own group and criticized all the others. Here, Paul very wisely explains that judgment by others and self-judgment, and even though widely prevalent, has its own flaws. Judgment by others can sometimes be wide off the mark. Also, self-judgment can always involve self-bias and prejudice. Therefore, Paul concludes only judgment by Christ alone is true and worthy. Christ alone knows our complete circumstances and true motives behind every thought and action. Therefore, Paul states, instead of trying to please others and self through the divisions in the church, the believers must try to please Christ and submit themselves to be judged only by Him. In today's world and even church, so many arguments and differences can be solved if we follow this wise suggestion of Apostle Paul. Second one, attitude from unchristian pride to humility for Christ. Corinth, being a very rich and influential city, the residents of this city prided themselves on being Corinthians and their high standard of living. As such, even members of the Corinthian church too had attitude of worldly pride on being Corinthians. As a church that had more wealth and power than most other churches, Paul thinks it is very necessary to point out the flaw in this attitude of the believers. Paul begins by saying sarcastically that the Corinthian believers are already rich and powerful, while he, the apostle and leader of the church, continues to be poor, hungry, and despicable for the Christ. He uses the vivid imagery of himself and Apollos being like slaves for Christ, ready to lay down even their lives for Christ. For Paul and Apollos, being humbled for Christ is the greatest virtue. On the other hand, Paul reminds the proud and rich Corinthians that whatever they think they possess is only the gift of God and not anything that they have achieved by their own merit. As such, the Paul exhorts them to leave worldly pride behind and follow Christ in all humility. To conclude, as we celebrate and commemorate the first of apostles, we meditate on the model we receive from their lives. Like Paul, let us submit ourselves to be judged by Christ alone, rather than others or even self. Also, being humble for Christ is a great virtue we all need to cultivate.